watch plants grow. That is his job. That's what gardening is, right? Watching plants grow. Okay. Now, and this is incredibly providential. In other words, Gregor Mendel gets, I guess you could say it another way, gets unbelievably lucky because other than the plants he chooses to study, almost every other living life form, every other plant, every other animal, even some simple animals like Paramecium, they have such a complex genetic makeup and such a complex phenotype. Well, we'll learn that word later. They have such complex genes related to the way they look that it's actually incredibly providential. It's a blessing that he studies plants because they're the easiest to understand of any organism. They have a very, very simple, very obvious genetic component. And it's likely that he had already suspected this before he started his research. And what he picks are things called pea plants, right? Good old pea plants, very similar to the frozen peas you eat today. A little bit different. It's a North German varietal, I believe he uses, instead of the Monsanto brand. You probably eat beef frozen peas, or thawed peas. But he's going to work with pea plants, and this is a very, very lucky choice because his experiment would work with almost nothing else. So pea plants worked out great for him.
It's like PEA, or just like
PEA. It's not plants made of urine.
no, I didn't think PEA.
I grew a pea plant last year.
What'd you do, Sam? Did you really?
Mm-hmm.
In your garden?
No, for Miss Phoebe's class.
Oh, okay, good. So pea plants, they're easy to grow, right?
Didn't yours die though?
Hey, all plants die.
Oh yeah.
The grass
Well,
withers and the flowers fade.
no,
For the
one of them grew
Okay.
really well.
Okay, good. I'm glad.
But I
But you made it. Okay, so we have these pea plants, and they're going to have a very, very simple, almost obvious genetic component to them. That's going to make Mendel strike upon what is the modern idea of genetics. So we need to figure out what he's going to do in his actual experiment. Now, he has plenty of time. He also has plenty of space. The monastery he lived in had lots and lots of land. He was kind of head gardener of the monastery. It is convenient. For our understanding of life, it's convenient. And so he had plenty of space to run all different kinds of experiments. In fact, he didn't experiment on just a couple plants. He experimented upon thousands and thousands of plants. Each experiment had between 750 and 3,000 plants in it, right? These are huge experiments, which means if he sees results, he can be pretty certain, right? The bigger your numbers are, the more certain you are of finding an actual effect. Yes,
But does
ma'am?
that mean that when he messes up, he has to like do all of it, like all the times, all over again?
Well, not if he just messes up one, right? Then he has 1,499 that aren't messed up, right?
But if like one's different than all the other ones, then he can't be sure.
Well, actually, he can be sure. So let's say he's looking for tall plants, right? And he gets 1,499 tall plants and one short plant. He can be sure that the short plant was a mistake. Something else went wrong, right? Now, if they're half and half, well, then he knows. Then he found something. But if there's just a couple it didn't work with, then something went wrong, right? They should. Okay, that's how he's going to decide this. Okay. So here's the experiments he does. He takes his pea plants, and he picks certain ones and calls them the P1. P for parentis, or parental. He's a monk, so he speaks Latin. Kaylee, be quiet. The P1 generation. Now, this, of course, is not the first pea plants on Earth, right? In fact, when we do genetics, we randomly pick the first generation we want to look at, and they get called P1. Now, if we wanted to, what would we call the parents of P1? P2. What would we call the grandparents of P1? P3. Great-grandparents, right? Parents, right? And we just pick one group and we call them parents, okay? It doesn't mean anything. It's just a sign we give them so we can know what we're talking about.
Is it the P stands for parents?
Well, parentis in Latin, but we call it parents.
Gotcha.
Okay? So these are going to be the parents, and then we can go up, naming higher and higher parents, and we'll see what we call the offspring in just a second, okay? So this is our P1 generation. This is the first group of plants he wants to look at. Now, there's a problem with doing generational studies. If you want to know how things are inherited, in other words, if you want to follow inheritance, what do you have to know?
Where it's past.
And what about the past?
What it's made up of.
The environment.
Okay, so if you want to know who stands to inherit something, what do you need to know?
Their genes.
Right. You need to know who the lineage is, right? You have to know the ancestors. You have to know who is breeding with who, right?
Right.
Okay, so here's, now this is not too hard. I don't know if any of you have raised livestock, but it's pretty easy to decide who mates with who with livestock. How do you do that?
Put them together.
Animal they
Ro-
are.
No, right. I don't mean which species mates with which species.
Male and female?
Yeah, that's right. That's how it works. All you do
That's the easy
is
way.
you just make sure you have the male in a pen, right?
That's what I'm saying.
And then,
Yeah, male and female.
Yep, that's right. They do have to. And then if you want that male to mate with a female, you just put the female in there also,
That's
right?
what I said.
Okay, so that's an easy way to make sure which animal is the parent of which other offspring. Now, why is that tricky in plants?
Because you can't put a male and a female in a
Okay, that's right. Bees go everywhere. What do bees do?
pollinate.
And that's right. So the birds and the bees, right? That's where we get that saying. The birds and the bees can fly, and they're hard to keep.
Flutter, because they go from plant to plant.
Yeah. Flirt, I think it was.
Flirt, that's what I meant.
So we have a difficulty making sure. So it's hard, even if you put a male plant next to a female plant, you can't be certain that one pollinated the other because other pollen can get in there. Does that make sense to everyone?
That's not what Mr. Gibbons said we call it bees in the. Yes, it is.
The birds.
No, he said it was because the birds bring. No, the bees eat the pollen, and then the birds eat the bees, or something like that. And then
I
they
got
eat
it.
you.
That's not what he said.
He said, when you eat a bee, you have a baby. That's why they say that.
I'm pretty sure he probably said the same thing.
He said something about the pollen.
They
ovaries?
also pollinate. They also pollinate.
Birds
Yeah. In fact, it just sits on the beak.
Never seen it.
Pollen's microscopic. Right? You've never seen pollen other than pine pollen.
I touched the flower and like all the yellow stuff came off on my finger.
Well, that's a lot of stuff around the pollen as well. In fact, when they release the pollen, that part will open up and release the pollen.
People say there's pollen in the air. You can't.
Right, except pine pollen, which is the thing that turns your car yellow when the pine tree starts shedding those pieces.
Oh, yeah.
Pine pollen's very large, right? Most pollen, yes, it is. Most pollen's small. Okay, so Mendel has to figure out a way to know that there hasn't been pollination he doesn't want to occur. Now, interestingly enough, pea plants, and we'll talk about less important a little bit more, actually have flowers that are both male and female. It's fairly common among flowers. In fact, when you think or draw the flower, you're usually drawing what's called a complete flower, which has male and female parts. The male part's called the stamen, the female's called the carpel or the pistil. We'll talk about that when we talk about plants a lot more. And he has a bright idea. What he does is he takes the stamen, the male part, from one plant he wants, and he places it inside the flower of the other plant, and then he ties it closed. Why would he tie it closed?
So we get out.
Well, not so much it won't get out. He's just not worried about pollen escaping. He's worried about other pollen coming in. Does that make sense to everybody? So he knows as soon as that flower blooms, he takes the stamen from the plant he wants, drops it in there, and actually he probably dusted it around a little bit, and then ties the flower closed so no other pollen can get in there. So he knows who's going to be the father and the mother, so to speak, of the seed that's produced, okay? He knows what's going to be. So he knows how to pollinate, and he's going to pick only certain plants. He's going to pick what are called true breeding plants, or plants that breed true. Anybody want to guess what that means to say something breeds true? It's not exactly the same as purebred. Breed true only refers to a certain trait. So if I have a plant that breeds true, let's say for red flowers, what would it mean to say it breeds true for red flowers? What would that mean? No. So what does breeding mean?
To make another.
To reproduce. So if it breeds true, all of its offspring will have
Red flower.
red flowers, no matter who it breeds with. Does that make sense? Breeding true means a trait shows up in all offspring. Breeding true means the trait shows up in all offspring. Now, he happens to know a number of true breeding traits in a number of different types of pea plants. Because that's what he did with his life. He hung out with pea plants, right?
Yeah.
I'm glad you agree. So, he's going to take these and he's going to breed true breeding plants with different kinds of plants, okay? Now, what will we expect to happen? What does true breeding mean?
The new species.
Then you'll get the same.
You'll get the same trait. Whichever trait breeds true, we'll expect to see it in every generation, right? We'll expect to see it in the young. So, these are the traits he chooses, and then he measures his next generation. Now, if P1 is the parent generation, what's going to be the child generation? Because what's child, what's son or daughter in Latin? Filius or filios. So this is the filial generation, right? The child, the offspring generation.
Aren't there plants called philias or something?
I don't know.
No.
I know camellias.
I know those.
Good. Okay, so we're going to have an F1. Now, what would the grandchildren be called if the children are F1, F2, great-grandchildren,
F3.
and we keep going. Does that make sense to everyone?
How come it goes 3, 2, 1, and then it goes 1, 2, 3?
Okay, so we pick these and call them the parents, right? So the higher up we go, we get more parenty, right? Their kids are F1, and the lower we go, the more generations down we get, okay? So we always, whichever we start with is P1, and then we look at their first generation of offspring, okay? And then we'll count down and we'll count up, depending on where we go. Generally, it doesn't go much further than P1 up, and it's hard to keep track past 2 or 3 generations, right? We'll see pedigrees that will work this out, just like your dog has a pedigree to figure out how pure blood it is. Okay, so let's take a look at what he did. He took true breeding tall plants and bred them, each one, to a short plant. Now, if tall is true breeding, what will pretty much all their offspring be? Tall, right? So when you breed true breeding tall with short plants, you get pretty much all tall plants. Okay? Now he said maybe this is just one trait. So he picked a whole bunch of other traits that he knew were true breeding. And he said, how can I need to check on these to make sure it's just not a phenomenon that's with tall stuff. So he picks axial flowers. Now what that means is it has flowers all the way up the stem. And he knew these bred true. And he bred them with plants with terminal flowers, meaning they only had flowers at the end. And when he bred true breeding axial with the terminal plants, he got
Axial.
axial. Almost all of them were axial. Almost all of them were axial. In other words, they almost all had flowers up the whole length of the stem.
Why? Yeah, why would it be for sure axial? Like, why could it not be for sure terminal?
Well, so he had been studying these plants, and he knew that there were certain plants in his garden, and they that were axial, and all their offspring grew axial plants, right? And so he's going to try to figure out why that is. Okay.
So he hasn't done the experiment.
Well, this is his first experiment, right? And as we'll see, the first experiment doesn't tell him a whole lot, right?
Like, so does terminal grow all terminal?
No, actually, so remember they're bred to each other. So when you take an axial plant and a terminal plant, he got an axial.
I don't get why how it's always.
Okay, so we're going to talk about why that is. In fact, he's going to have to explain. He's going to have to do another experiment to figure out what's going on. Because remember, what was the primary theory before this? So if we had a tall and a short plant, and that's true, we should get a medium, which is why it's strange, and Mendel had realized this, it's strange that you got all these tall plants, okay? And he's going to give us a reason for that once he finishes his experiment.
How do we know which plants were true breed?
From years of raising them, right? He just knew that this plant right here, every time it flowers and drops the seed, and I plant that seed, it's always the same.
But how are some plants like that and some plants aren't?
He's going to explain that as we go through this, right? He's going to, in fact, he's going to see how this works, and that he's the first one to figure out why some plants are like that.
Then, like, how come it's like, Mr. Ben's tall, Mr. Kate's tall, but Emmy's short?
Okay, are they pea plants?
No, yeah, but no.
So you remember we were talking about how this works on almost nothing but pea plants? Okay.
No.
So if he tried that experiment on humans, aside from the ethical problems it would create, right, he would not have been able to figure this out because humans are way too complicated. So what he's going to find out is true. It's just that humans are going to have not one trait, or they're not going to have one gene for these things. They're going to have like 80 genes.
What would happen if he like bred two true breeding or breeding true plants or whatever? Like,
Okay, so if they are true breeding, the trait would obviously show up, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So he's getting, but what's weird is when he breeds a true breeding with the opposite plant, he still gets the true trait.
But what if you had both people? Like, what if the
So you have two true breeding tall plants,
yeah?
then you get a tall plant.
But what about the one with the hold up. No, hold up. It's like terminal. If that was a true breeding flower.
But it wasn't. Only axial was.
How?
Well, we're gonna see why that is. Okay. But so he's noticed that these are true breeding. He's trying to figure out why they're true breeding. Okay.
What would happen if one was a true breeding tall plant, one was a true breeding short plant? That's
So
what
here's
I was trying to ask.
right. So can it be a true breeding short plant? What happened when he bred a short to a tall plant? What did he get?
Oh, but I'm just saying, is
So
the one
he-
true breeding plant for tall thing?
See, that's what he's figuring out here, right? So is short true breeding? No. Is terminal true breeding? So why is it that tall is and short is? That's what we're trying to figure out. Okay. So, and just to run this list quickly, purple flowers are true breeding. So what happens when you cross purple and white flowers? You get purple flowers, right? Yellow peas are true breeding. So what happens when you cross yellow peas, green peas? Yellow peas, right? And finally, and I put them all in order on purpose, round peas and wrinkled peas. Round peas are true breeding, so what do you get?
Round.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay,
Wrinkled pea.
that's right. So all the peas you eat are not from that line, right? People, in fact, they're rounder because they have more sugar in them. People like sweet peas more than they like, bitter peas, which is why when someone likes someone, they don't say, "Aw," although that'd be a good name for you, bitter pea. So we have.
Oh, sweet pea. I was thinking love pea.
Okay, so
I'm not a bitter person.
let's take a look at what we have here. Okay. Sure, this is interesting, but he hasn't actually discovered anything new yet because he already knew these traits were true breeding. All he's shown is that they're true breeding. So if this is all the experiment he had done, he wouldn't have learned much. It's the second part of this that becomes interesting because he does something very unusual, something that he had realized was possible and that other gardeners knew was possible, but it seems that scientists, especially people studying inheritance, did not realize plants could do. So let's take a look at the next generation. What are they going to be called? F2. Now for the F2 generation, he does something that only plants can do. And I don't think there's some animals that are actually hermaphroditic. In other words, they have both male and female reproductive parts, but they can't do this. Plants can. No mammals. It's things like sea anemones, right? You wouldn't be offended by sea
They
anemones.
can have babies by themselves.
They can't. Even though they have male and female parts, they can't self-fertilize. But plants can self-pollinate.
Aren't there like hermaphrodites on humans though? Like they.
You should be careful what internet sites you go to. No, they're not. Okay. So,
Wait, no, not like natural, but like can't you like get?
hermaphrodite means you can produce both egg and sperm.
Oh, I didn't know. I thought it just meant that you had
no
those
humans can
sexual
do that.
organs.
No humans can do that.
I thought Lady Gaga did.
She didn't. That's why she's Lady Gaga. Oh, you saw on something.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So,
Actually, Erin.
was it called the internet?
No, it's called Erin. She told me.
Well, if there's one thing I know about Erin, she is always correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have these plants, and they can actually self-pollinate. But how can he be certain that these plants self-pollinate?
While watching the grandkids.
By not giving them pollination.
Okay, no, remember, these are plants, pollen's in the air, right?
Yeah.
Take
Oh, put them inside.
They reproduce.
Well, if they're inside, they can't get sunlight.
This is a question about pollen. If it's like in the air and microscopic, how did he get the pollen on two plants and bring them together?
Right, so he knows, so the stamen holds the pollen, right? So he takes it from one plant, the plant he wants, and he puts it into the flower of the other one and closes it, because he knows it's on the stamen. Okay. That's right, and this time he doesn't even let these flowers bloom. Does that make sense?
How does he not want to?
Yeah.
Which doesn't.
I thought he tied it the first time.
After after he put in pollen from another plant. But if he ties these closed before they bloom, can any pollen get in?
No.
What will be the only pollen in there?
The pollinator.
Their own, right?
Oh wait, so the second time was it no pollen?
No pollen got in at
other
all.
plant.
Right. So he wants, before they even bloom, he ties stuff.
Okay.
Okay? So, no pollen can get in, right? Caleb, move back. You cannot sit next to Isabel anymore. So, when he tied off the plants, he made sure that no pollen from other plants get in there, which meant, who was the mommy and the daddy? The same one. Now, if blending theory is true, right, and you have the same mother as father, what should the offspring be? It should be identical, right? It should be exactly the same. Because there's nothing to blend, right? It should be exactly the same. It should be a clone, right? That's what should happen.
Not bananas are.
But yes, but they actually don't let bananas pollinate anymore. They just cut off a branch and stick it in the ground and grow a new tree.
Wait, how like that?
Okay, so if blending theory is right, and the blending theory says it's a mix between the mom and the dad, right? So if you have the same, that the dad and mom are the same, then the mix will be exactly the same, right? So if you have a tall plant that self-pollinates, it would have to have all tall plants. Does that make sense? Okay, but that's not what happened.
What? I didn't know that wasn't true. I wrote
Okay.
down that it was the exact same.
If blending theory is true, it should be the same. But what he actually found was a 75-25 split. So, when he self-pollinated the pea plants in the F2, the tall ones, he got 75% tall, but 25% short. Okay? When he crossed the yellow, when he self-pollinated the yellow peas in the F2 generation, in the F1 generation, excuse me, he found that he had 75% yellow, but 25% green. When he took the flowers, he found that he had 75% purple flowers, but 25% white. And that's weird. And that means this is impossible. This cannot be right. Okay? Obviously, this cannot be right. But it also brought up another interesting factor that Mendel absolutely gets credit for figuring out on this. This is a genius realization he had. What's the ratio of 75 to 25?
3/4 or 3-to-1.
3 to 1. Now, here's what's super weird about this. This is for one trait. How many parents do you have?
2.
2. Even with the same person, you have 2. But what does this add up to? 4. This makes it look like you have 4 parents. Does that make sense to everyone? This is a weird ratio, right? This ratio shouldn't exist if you only have 2 parents. If they're blended, you shouldn't have a 3-to-1 ratio. That is a ratio of 4 total things. Does that make sense to everyone? 3 plus 1 is 4. Okay?
Why couldn't you subtract?
Because ratios mean that there's 3 of them like this and 1 of them like this.
Because I can also say 6 to 2, and then we have 8.
Right. So if it was 6 to 2, right? If it was 6 to 2, we would reduce it and get what?
3 to 1.
3 to 1. Okay. Does this reduce down to 2 though? Well, because it doesn't reduce down to 2, it makes it look like we have more than 2 parents.
Couldn't you reduce down to 1.5 to 0.5 and then have 2?
Well, 1.5, right, to 0.5,
Equals 2.
right, but it also means you now have a half a parent.
Yeah.
And now what we have, 1 half a parent here, and another half of a parent here, right? I mean, we can keep reducing down this and get 0.3 times 0.1, and now we have 0.1 of a parent, but we can't have 0.1 of a parent,
What
right?
does that mean?
Okay, so that means how many possible traits can you get?
4.
4. Which means each parent must offer
2.
2. Okay? Each parent must be able to offer 2 what Mendel's going to call factors. So Mendel comes up with an explanation for this weirdness. And his first rule, or what you can try for, is the rule of unit factors. Okay? This is the rule of unit factors. Now, I want you to think about this. tall plants from true breeding tall parents had short offspring. So what must be hidden somewhere in the tall plants? Shortness is somehow hidden in there. Does that make sense to everyone? And so what Mendel realized is you could have a quality that's not expressed, right? You could have a quality for shortness which is not expressed, but still must be there because the offspring get it. Remember how we talked, or someone asked about skipping generations?
Yeah.
Shortness skipped a generation here. It does not work this way in people, okay? It does not work this way in people, but it does in pea plants.
Wait, I thought the whole fruit reading. I thought that worked up until they got to the self-pollination.
It did, and the self-pollination messed it up.
So this is only for the self-pollination.
Well, so this is going to be true for everything, okay? So what we got with the self-pollinating plants is the ones we self-pollinated must have had some shortness hiding in them
So
somewhere.
they're the exception to it.
Well, actually, no, we're going to see how this all works together, right? Because remember, who was the mommy of the plants we made in the F1 generation? We had a tall daddy and a
Short.
so that shortness somehow stayed in there. Does that make sense?
No, because it was tall.
Well, that's the thing. That tall one had short offspring. Well, that's what we did. Remember 75-25 split?
But that's what this.
Right. So that's the next generation. So, okay. So,
That's the baby.
so here we have,
That's the baby.
here's the parents, right? We have tall and a short plant, right? And their kids are all tall. But when these kids reproduced, they actually made, so let's just say, 3 tall plants
Oh, I get it.
and 1 short plant. Does that make sense? Which meant that this generation was all tall, must have somehow had a hidden shortness in them.
So what if the F2 one, that's like that one, so, or no, the one that,
All right, so this is our parents. This is F1. This is F2.
okay, F1 is what I'm talking about. So what if they breed like another one?
One that wasn't just like them? Okay, well, we're going to see what would happen with that once we figure out what Mendel realized because of this, okay?
I don't really understand the self-pollination.
Okay, so the flowers produce pollen and they produce eggs, right? So flowers can actually pollinate themselves. So self-pollinating means that this generation right here, one plant pollinated itself, which means the mom and the dad were the same individual. They had the same genes, right? Now self-pollinating, which you would think would give you all tall plants, because these plants are tall. Something weird happened. Some shorts showed up. In fact, 25% showed up, which means you have a 3-to-1 ratio. And that 3-to-1 ratio means we must have at least 4 factors possible. Does that make sense? We're going to see how that works as we move through.
So that one has, the one in the middle has a short gene that wasn't expressed.
Yeah, well, we know now it has a short gene, right? He didn't. He just knew there was some shortness hidden in this somehow. We know there's a shortened gene that didn't get expressed.
Okay.
In fact, he's going to name which one gets expressed and which one doesn't. Okay, but first let's get to this first rule, okay? First rule is 2 factors, we will learn to call them alleles. 2 factors control observable traits. 2 factors control observable traits. So that's true of in every individual, there are 2 factors that control the trait. Where do those factors come from? That's right, 1 from each parent. So we have 2 factors control observable traits, 1 from each parent. And here's the important part about that, okay? The factors are discrete units. The factors are discrete units. Okay, what does that mean? So let's say we have just like that, you're right. We have half a glass of water and half a glass of Kool-Aid. When I mix them together, what will I get?
Kool-Aid.
A full glass of watered down Kool-Aid. These are not discrete, right? I've added them together, I've got twice as much, but now they're mixed together. These things blended, right?
What is discrete meaning?
Okay, I'm going to get that in 1 second. Now, I have an orange and a banana, or jalapeno, whatever. Now, when I add them up, how much fruit do I have? I have two pieces of fruit, right? But have they blended together? I still have an orange and a banana, right? These do not blend. They're discrete. They are contained. So, if I had, let's say, we took a tall and a short and they blended, I would get a medium, right?
Right.
But they didn't blend. This is not what's happening. This is. I'm adding discrete units which stand by themselves.
So that the bottom one is discrete.
This is discrete. This is blended, right? And here's the easy way to tell. Out of this, can I get back out? Can I take water from this and leave Kool-Aid?
No.
I mean, not without some major unbelievable evidence. Actually, you can't do it all right. I can't take the same water out, can I?
No.
Now, how hard would it be to take an orange out of this bowl?
Easy.
Because it's discrete. Does that make sense to everyone? In other words, the factors will not change as they move, okay? So that is our rule of unit factors. You get two factors for each trait. He's a little wrong about that, but for right now it's enough. He's right about pea plants at least. Two factors for each trait. One from each parent, and they are discrete units. Discrete units. They do not blend. They stay strong. Okay? Now, here's what else you notice. So, this plant, F1, because of this offspring, must have what in here?
Short.
It must have some shortness. But obviously it has some tallness because it's tall. Right, well, here's the thing. It only has two factors, right?
So what's the straight on one?
Oh, but that was in the whole, that was not in one individual, that was in the whole population.
That's 1 to 1.
Okay, so, right, but this is just one plant, right?
Yeah.
This is just one plant, so each plant only has two, right? But, as we saw, there are 4 different outcomes we can have. We'll see what that is a little bit later, probably tomorrow. Now, this plant must have a short factor, right? But what does the plant look like? Which means this guy wins, right? And what do we call the fact that he wins?
Dominant.
Dominant. So this is the rule of dominance. One of the two factors dominates the other. One of the two factors dominates the other. Now, as we'll see, this is not always true, but it's true here. One of the discrete factors dominates the other, right? One of the alleles is what we'll learn to call it. One,
Like the apple wins over banana.
right, so, yeah, okay. I don't know how to carry on that fruit analogy anymore, but yeah, it would be like this bowl was now a bowl of oranges. I know, so the analogy does not work there, admittedly.
Or more people eat the orange.
Yeah, maybe, or maybe let's just stop.
I like the fruit
Did you
now.
repeat the rule?
Let's just
It
leave it.
makes more sense.
The rule is one factor dominates the other. So, one factor dominates the other. Tallness will dominate in pea plants, only in pea plants, shortness, right? Tallness will dominate shortness. Okay. What do we call not the dominant one?
Recessive.
Recessive, right? Do you remember this, dominant versus recessive? Now, I've written them this way, but that's not how we actually write them. If tallness, and that is a capital T, that's tall, how will I write the allele for shortness?
Tiny.
Lowercase.
Little t. Does that make
Little
sense? Uh-huh. So if I have, let's say, red is dominant, what will white be?
Little r.
A little r, right? That's how we write.
W.
Not here. We always use the letter that describes the main dominant trait, okay? Just trust me on this. It'll make a big deal tomorrow. But right now, just trust me, okay? Now, not to get too far into this, but what must this one look like? What must this one's factors have been? So what did I get from Dad? Tall. What did I get from Mom? Okay, so that's what it looked like, right? Okay. Let's see if we figure out what the parents must have looked like. So, the tall parent had to have at least one what? Tall, right? The short parent, could it have had any talls?
Yes. Yes.
No. Well, it could
Well,
have had
remember which one's dominant.
No, no, big S, little S. It's short.
Okay, but we're talking about tallness, right?
I cannot do
We're talking about tallness. So, if we had a big T over here,
Must have been
the
too
mama
short.
would have been tall.
How?
Because, okay, which one's dominant?
The tall.
Tall. And anyone who has a big T is tall. Is Mama tall?
No.
So she has to have two traits, though. What do they have to be?
Small.
Too small. Does that make sense?
Make it tall.
Okay, so if it has two smalls, it's small. If it had a big T, it would be tall. Right? Big T wins. Every time we have a big T, it makes for a tall plant. Okay? So this was what Mama was like, right?
Why couldn't you just have an S? So why don't you put
Okay. No S's, right? No S's. Little t is the trait for shortness. Big T is the trait for tallness.
Okay.
Okay? That's just how the world is.
So I have two little T's instead of just one.
Because everyone has to have two, right? Well, we're not done. We got to figure out what this one is, right? So this is big T in question mark. We knew what this one was, right? And we know what Mom has to be. Now we got to figure out the other one Dad has. We know he's tall, right? Okay. But Dad is also true breeding, right? So in fact, he has to have both big T's, right? Because if Dad was like this, then some of their kids would be what? Short. Were any of their kids short?
No.
So Dad has to be like that.
Because he's true. Right.
Because he's true breeding, right? Remember he's true breeding? This guy, all of his offspring will be tall, right? Because they get one from each parent. What will they get from this parent? Tall. And tall always wins, right? So all of his kids will be tall, right?
If I always wins, then how'd you get an S down there?
Well, there's no S, right?
For a small.
So you mean on this generation? Okay. Now we're going to go into some more detail. I'm going to do it really quickly right here, okay? So these are the possible combinations we can have here, right? Since he's both Mom and Dad, right? Remember we self-pollinated? Self-pollinated. So I can get two big T's, right? Because you can get one big T from Mom, one big T from Dad, they're the same one. I can get a big T and a little t, right? I can get a little t and a big T. And I can also get,
Two little T's.
now, how many of these are tall?
3.
1, 2, 3. How many are short?
1.
What ratio is that?
3 to 1.
3 to 1. That's what he figured out. We're going to be doing this a ton more. If it doesn't make sense right now, we're going to do it a lot. Don't worry.
Is it all possible they can all be little T's?
So there's a small chance it could happen. But here's the thing: if he'd only done this with like 10 plants, they may have all been short. This is random. But if he does it with 2,000 plants, it's going to even out. Does that make sense? And that's what he did. That's what he supposed to do.
Is there a difference between the middle two just because you changed the order of them?
No. In fact, we'll never write it like this. I was trying to let you see how they combine. Okay. We'll always put the dominant first. I was trying to make that clear.
So this tree for like in this area or other trees for like other than
Well,
he has the trait of
right, so we're going to talk about how it works for humans later, right? This will be true for humans, but we're going to have more than just one factor. No, he did all the ones, right? All the ones we just went over, he did. Okay? We're not done. We are not done. Calm down. The bell rings, you can stop. Okay, we have one more law, and that's the law of segregation. Okay? The law of segregation says the factors pair randomly. The factors pair randomly, okay? Which means either parental factor can be passed on to the offspring. Either parental factor can be passed on to the offspring. So this has to be true because if we had a big T, little t self-pollination, what would happen if it only could donate the big T? They'd all be tall. What would happen if it could only donate the little t? They'd all be short. In fact, they have to pair randomly because otherwise we wouldn't get a 3-to-1 ratio of tall, 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 short, right? They have to pair randomly. So when the gametes divide, and we'll learn how they actually divide the factors, the genes, when we get to meiosis. But when they divide, they segregate and combine randomly. In other words, these are going to divide from each other, and we do the Punnett square, we'll see how it is that we divide them from each other. Okay, we'll pick up there tomorrow.